Kelvin Thomases had seen many species go to war. As a historian for the Velnorian High Council, he had recorded battles across 100 star systems. He had watched empires rise and fall. He had documented the strategies of the greatest military minds in the galaxy. But nothing in his long career had prepared him for what he was about to witness. The Velnorian command vessel Starlight Covenant hung in orbit above Vaymar 6, a mining world at the edge of contested space. 40 Alliance ships surrounded it, representing 12 different species. They had gathered to stop the Keth Dominion, a brutal empire that consumed everything in its path. The Keth had already destroyed 3 colonies in this sector. Vaymar 6 would be next unless the Alliance could stop them. Kelvin stood on the observation deck, his recording device floating beside him. His pale blue skin reflected the light of distant stars as he watched the fleet assemble. Admiral Sirith, the Velnorian commander, paced behind him with nervous energy. "The scouts report the Keth fleet will arrive within the hour," Sirith said. His voice carried the weight of command, but Kelvin could hear the fear beneath it. "We are still waiting for the human contingent." Kelvin turned his large eyes toward the Admiral. "Humans? I was not aware they had joined the Alliance." "A recent addition. Their homeworld is far from here, in a distant spiral arm. They offered 3 ships to our cause." Sirith made a dismissive gesture with his long fingers. "I do not expect much from them. They are a young species, primitive by our standards." Kelvin had heard stories about humans, though he had never met one. They came from a harsh world called Earth, a planet of extreme temperatures and dangerous predators. Some called them Deathworlders, a term used for species that evolved on particularly hostile planets. But such species were usually aggressive and simple-minded. They rarely developed advanced civilizations. A signal chimed on the communication array. 3 small ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the formation. They were angular and functional, lacking the elegant curves of Velnorian vessels or the organic shapes of Zendari cruisers. They looked like tools, built for a single purpose. "The humans have arrived," an officer announced. Kelvin studied the ships with curiosity. They were tiny compared to the Alliance vessels. Each one could fit inside the Starlight Covenant's main hangar bay. He wondered why the humans had even bothered to come. Admiral Sirith called for a war council. Representatives from each species gathered in the strategic chamber, a circular room with holographic displays showing the battlefield. Kelvin positioned himself in a corner to observe and record. The human delegation entered last. Kelvin's breath caught in his throat. They moved differently than other species. There was a fluidity to their motion, a constant readiness that reminded him of predators he had studied on primitive worlds. Their eyes scanned the room, taking in every detail, every potential threat. They wore simple gray uniforms with no decorations or rank insignia that Kelvin could recognize. The leader stepped forward. He was average height for a human, with short brown hair and a face that showed signs of age and experience. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, and they held something that Kelvin could not name. "Commander Danny Cole," the human said. His voice was calm and steady. "Earth Defense Force. My people are ready to fight." A Sindari admiral laughed. The sound was wet and gurgling through his translation device. "3 ships? Against the Keth Armada? Your courage is admirable, human. But courage alone does not win wars." Danny Cole smiled. It was not a friendly expression. "We shall see." The War Council continued for another hour. Strategies were discussed and debated. The Alliance would form a defensive perimeter around Vaymar 6, using the planet's gravity well to limit the Keth approach vectors. It was a sound plan, built on centuries of military doctrine. The humans said little during the discussion. They simply listened and nodded. Kelvin found their silence more unsettling than any boast could have been. As the council ended, Kelvin approached the human commander. His historian's curiosity demanded answers. "Commander Cole," he said, "I am Kelvin Thomases, a recorder of history. May I ask why your people came so far to fight in a war that does not concern your world?" Danny Cole looked at him for a long moment. Those storm gray eyes seemed to see right through Kelvin's scales and into something deeper. "The Keth attacked a civilian transport 6 months ago," Danny said. "It killed everyone aboard. 300 people, including children. They were not soldiers. They were just traveling between colonies." Kelvin nodded slowly. "And you seek revenge?" "No." Danny's voice dropped lower. "We seek to make sure it never happens again." To anyone. Before Kelvin could respond, alarms began to wail throughout the ship. The Keth had arrived. He rushed back to the observation deck and felt his blood turn cold. The Keth fleet filled the view screen like a swarm of metal insects. 80 warships, each one bristling with weapons. They outnumbered the Alliance 2-1. Panic spread through the command deck. Officers shouted at each other in a dozen languages. Admiral Sirith gripped his command chair with white-knuckled hands. A transmission cut through the chaos. A Keth commander appeared on the main screen, his insectoid face clicking and buzzing as he spoke. "Alliance vessels, you are outnumbered and outmatched. Surrender now, and we will grant you quick deaths. Resist, and we will make your suffering last for generations." Silence fell over the command deck. Kelvin could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. He looked around at the faces of the Alliance officers and saw defeat already settling into their eyes. Then he heard something that made no sense. Laughter. Danny Cole stood at the edge of the observation deck. His arms crossed over his chest. He was laughing, a low and quiet sound that sent shivers down Kelvin's spine. "Commander Cole?" Admiral Sirith's voice cracked. "What do you find amusing about our situation?" Danny turned to face the Admiral. That smile was back on his face, the one that looked more like a threat than an expression of joy. "Nothing amusing, Admiral. I am just glad they brought so many ships." He keyed his communication device. "Morrison, Grant, all units. Battle stations. We go in 60 seconds. Kelvin stared at the human in disbelief. "You cannot be serious. They outnumber us. You're 3 ships against 80? Danny Cole met his gaze. In that moment, Kelvin saw something in those human eyes that he had never seen in any species before. It was not madness. It was not courage. It was something older and darker, something that had been forged in millions of years of survival on a world that wanted them dead. "Watch him learn, historian," Danny said. "This is what humans do." The 3 human ships broke formation and accelerated toward the Keth Armada. Kelvin watched them go, and for the first time in his long life, he felt true fear. Not of the Keth, not of death. He was afraid of what he was about to witness. The 3 human ships flew straight into the heart of the Keth Armada. Every tactical display on the Starlight Covenant showed them as small blue dots surrounded by a sea of red enemies. To every trained military mind watching, it looked like suicide. Kelvin pressed his hands against the observation window. His recording device captured everything, but his mind struggled to process what he was seeing. No species charged directly at a superior force. It violated every rule of warfare that the galaxy had developed over thousands of years. "They are insane," Admiral Sirith whispered. "They will be destroyed in seconds." The Keth fleet opened fire. Hundreds of energy beams shrieked through space toward the human vessels. The darkness lit up like a festival of death. Kelvin waited for the inevitable explosions, for the human ships to become nothing but scattered debris. They did not die. The human ships moved in ways that should have been impossible. They rolled and twisted through the wall of fire, slipping between energy beams with margins so small that Kelvin's instruments could barely measure them. Lieutenant Amy Russell's fire squadron launched from the lead vessel 30 small craft that spread out like seeds in the wind. "How are they doing that?" an officer shouted. "Their ships are not that fast. Our sensors show standard propulsion systems." Kelvin understood then, even if the others did not. The humans were not relying on their ships. They were relying on themselves. Their reflexes, their instincts, their ability to make split-second decisions in the chaos of battle. They were not piloting their vessels. They were becoming their vessels. The human ships reached the Keth Vanguard and did something that made Kelvin's stomach turn. Instead of pulling away for another pass, they flew deeper into the enemy formation. They got so close that the Keth ships could not fire without hitting each other. Then the humans started shooting at point-blank range. Even their smaller weapons did terrible damage. Keth vessels exploded one after another. The human ships took hits too. Terrible hits that ripped through their hulls and sent debris spinning into the void. But they kept fighting. A human cruiser with half its structure gone continued to fire its remaining weapons. A pilot with a burning cockpit stayed on her attack. "Run until she completed her mission." Amy Russell's voice crackled over the open channel. "Lead flight, follow me in. Target their command ship's engines. Second flight, cover our approach." Our fighter dove toward the largest Keth vessel, a massive Dreadnought that served as the enemy flagship. Kelvin watched her weave through defensive fire that would have destroyed any other pilot. She flew like she had been born in the darkness of space. Like gravity and fear were concepts that did not apply to her. Her weapons struck the Dreadnought's engine array. Secondary explosions rippled along the massive ship's hull. The Keth flagship began to list to one side, its main propulsion crippled. "Impossible," Admiral Sirith breathed. "One fighter did that." The Keth fleet reacted with confusion. They had expected the Alliance to form defensive lines, to fight in the predictable patterns that had worked for centuries. They had not expected an enemy to charge into their midst and fight like cornered animals. "Commander." Danny Cole's voice came over the Alliance communication channel. "Admiral Sirith, now would be a good time to join us." Kelvin saw the Admiral hesitate. The old military doctrine screamed at him to maintain formation, to protect the fleet. But something else was happening on the battlefield. The Keth line was wavering. For the first time in this war, the enemy looked uncertain. "All ships," Sirith commanded. "Advance and support the human forces." The Alliance fleet surged forward. 40 ships joined the 3 human vessels in their desperate assault. The battle became a swirling chaos of fire and metal. Kelvin could no longer track individual ships. He could only watch the destruction unfold. A human vessel exploded nearby. Kelvin saw escape pods launch from its broken hull, tiny capsules carrying survivors into the deadly void. But even as their ship died around them, the human crew continued firing. The last gunner stayed at his post until the reactor went critical. Kelvin felt tears forming in his eyes. He did not understand these creatures. They should have run. They should have preserved themselves. Instead, they fought until the very end, extracting a terrible price for every life they lost. The battle lasted for 2 hours. When it was over, the Keth had lost 34 ships. The Alliance had lost 12, including 2 of the 3 human vessels. But the enemy fleet was retreating, its formation broken, its confidence shattered. Victory. Against all odds, they had won. Kelvin slumped against the observation window. His legs trembled beneath him. He had recorded wars before, but nothing like this. Nothing so brutal and so magnificent at the same time. Admiral Sirith approached him. The Velnorian commander looked 10 years older than he had that morning. "Did you get everything?" Sirith asked. Kelvin nodded. "Every moment. Though I do not know if anyone will believe it. A new alarm sounded. Kelvin looked at the tactical display and felt his brief moment of relief evaporate. The Keth were landing ground forces on Vamar 6. Thousands of enemy soldiers were descending toward the civilian settlements. The space battle was over. The ground war was about to begin. Danny Cole's face appeared on the command screen. His uniform was torn and stained with blood. A wound on his forehead had been hastily bandaged, but his eyes still held that same terrifying intensity. "Admiral, my ground forces are ready to deploy. Sergeant Marcus Grant will lead the assault. Request permission to begin the drop." Sirith stared at the human commander. "You have already lost 2 ships. Your people have suffered enough. Let the Alliance ground forces handle this." Danny shook his head slowly. "There are civilians down there. Families. Children. My people do not abandon innocents to monsters." He paused. "Permission or not, we are going." The channel closed. Kelvin watched through the observation window as shuttles launched from the remaining human vessel. They fell toward the planet below like seeds of destruction. Marcus Grant's voice echoed across the communication system. "All units, this is Sergeant Grant. We have 3,000 civilians counting on us. Failure is not an option. Lock and load. We drop in 2 minutes." Kelvin made a decision that surprised even himself. He grabbed his recording device and headed for the shuttle bay. If he was going to document human warfare, he needed to see it up close. He needed to understand why these strange creatures from a distant world were willing to die for people they had never met. The shuttle shook as it entered the atmosphere. Kelvin held on tight and watched the humans around him prepare for battle. Their faces were calm. Their hands were steady. They checked their weapons and their equipment with practiced efficiency. Sergeant Marcus Grant sat across from him. The human soldier was large and muscular, with dark skin and eyes that had seen too much death. "Historian," Grant said, "you sure you want to come along? This is going to get ugly." Kelvin swallowed his fear. "I must see. I must understand." Grant smiled, and for just a moment, Kelvin saw something human behind the warrior's mask. Something kind. "Stick close to me," Grant said. "I will keep you alive long enough to write your book." The shuttle doors opened, and the humans charged into battle. The Keth never expected them to charge. That moment of surprise was all the humans needed. Kelvin watched from his hiding position as the human soldiers burst from cover like predators unleashed from cages. They crossed the killing ground in seconds, moving so fast that the Keth gunners could not track them. The first line of defenders fell before they could fire a single shot. Commander Danny Cole led the assault. He moved through the chaos with terrible grace, his weapon spitting fire as he advanced. Beside him, Marcus Grant and Kate Morrison matched his pace, their movements synchronized through years of training and trust. The Keth defenders tried to regroup. They formed a secondary line at the shelter entrance, laying down a wall of suppressing fire. 2 human soldiers fell, struck by energy beams that burned through their armor. Their comrades did not stop. They kept pushing forward, using the bodies of fallen Keth as cover. "Breaching charge!" Someone shouted. Sam Torres, the demolitions expert, sprinted toward the main door. Energy beams streaked past him, missing by centimeters. He slapped the device against the reinforced metal and dove aside. The explosion tore the door from its frame. Smoke and dust filled the air. Before it could settle, the humans were inside. Kelvin followed at a distance, his recording device capturing everything. The interior of the shelter was a maze of corridors and chambers designed to protect miners during surface storms. Now it had become a battlefield. The Keth had fortified every junction. They fought with desperate ferocity, knowing that retreat was not an option. But the humans fought harder. In the close quarters of the tunnels, their speed and aggression gave them an advantage that no amount of numbers could overcome. Kelvin saw a human soldier take a wound to his leg. Instead of falling, he propped himself against the wall and continued firing, covering his teammates as they advanced. He saw Lisa Vance drag a wounded Keth prisoner to safety, treating his injuries even as bullets flew overhead. "Why?" Kelvin asked her. "Why do you help them? They are your enemies." Lisa looked at him with tired eyes. "Because causing unnecessary suffering is not who we are. We fight to protect, not to destroy." The battle pushed deeper into the facility. The humans encountered pockets of Keth resistance at every turn, but nothing could stop their advance. They moved with a single purpose, a shared determination that bordered on obsession. Then the lights went out. Darkness swallowed the tunnels. Kelvin's eyes struggled to adjust, his Volnorian vision poorly suited for complete blackness. But the humans barely paused. He heard their footsteps continue forward, their movements unaffected by the loss of light. "They cut the power," Grant's voice came through the darkness. "Stay close. We know where we are going." A Keth soldier lunged from the shadows. Kelvin never saw him coming, but Kyle Bennett did. The young soldier moved faster than thought, driving his knife into the attacker's throat. The Keth fell without a sound. "Historian," Kyle said, his voice steady despite the blood on his hands. "Stay behind me." They reached the main shelter chamber. Kelvin's eyes had finally adjusted enough to make out shapes in the dim emergency lighting. He saw rows of frightened faces, thousands of civilians huddled together, surrounded by Keth guards. Children clung to their parents. Elderly creatures trembled with fear. A voice echoed through the chamber. It belonged to the Keth commander, a massive warrior named Vorath. He stood at the center of the room, his clawed hand wrapped around the arm of a small child. "Humans." Vorath's voice was a clicking growl that the translator rendered into harsh words. "You have fought well, better than expected. But this is where it ends." He lifted the child higher. The little one screamed, "Surrender now, or I start killing hostages. One every minute until you lay down your weapons." Kelvin felt his heart pounding. He looked at the human soldiers. They had stopped at the chamber entrance, their weapons raised but not firing. He could see the tension in their bodies, the barely contained rage in their eyes. Danny Cole stepped forward. His voice was calm, almost conversational. "Let the child go, Commander Vorath. Let all of them go, and I will give you a fair fight. Just you and me." Vorath laughed, a harsh clicking sound. "You? Challenge me? I am twice your size human. I have killed warriors from a dozen species. What makes you think you could survive even 1 minute against me?" Danny smiled. It was the most terrifying expression Kelvin had ever seen. "Because you have never fought something like me before." The lights went out again. But this time, it was not the Keth who had cut them. "Megan," Danny said quietly. Now, somewhere in the facility, Megan Price had reached the power controls. Explosions echoed through distant corridors as Sam Torres's backup charges detonated. The Keth communication systems went dead. Their defensive positions became chaos. The humans attacked. They struck from every direction, emerging from the darkness like nightmares given form. The Keth guards fell one by one, overwhelmed by enemies they could not see. The civilians screamed and scattered, but the humans moved around them with surgical precision. Not one innocent was harmed. Vorath threw the child aside and drew his weapon. He fired wildly into the darkness, hitting nothing but shadows. Then Danny Cole was upon him. Kelvin watched the fight with horrified fascination. Vorath was bigger, stronger, and better armed. By every measure, he should have won. But Danny Cole did not fight by the rules that the Keth understood. The human commander moved with brutal efficiency. He dodged Vorath's strikes by millimeters, counterattacking with fists and elbows and knees. He took hits that should have killed him and kept fighting. Blood streamed down his face from a deep gash, but his eyes never wavered. Vorath stumbled backward, suddenly uncertain. He had fought many species, but none of them had ever looked at him the way this human did. None of them had ever smiled while bleeding. "What are you?" Vorath demanded. Danny's answer was a punch that shattered the Keth commander's jaw. Vorath fell to his knees. Danny stood over him, breathing hard, covered in blood, both human and Keth. "I am the thing that monsters fear," Danny said. "I am human." He did not kill Vorath. He simply walked away, leaving the broken commander for the Alliance soldiers who would come later. The battle was over. The facility was secured. Marcus Grant began organizing the civilian evacuation, his soldiers gently guiding the frightened people towards safety. Kate Morrison counted heads, ensuring that not one person was left behind. Kelvin approached Danny Cole. The human commander sat against the wall, letting Lisa Vance tend to his many wounds. He looked exhausted, aged by the terrible effort of the day. But when he saw Kelvin, he managed a weak smile. "Did you get what you came for, historian?" Kelvin did not know how to answer. He had come to record a battle. Instead, he had witnessed something far more significant. He had seen the thing that made humans different from every other species in the galaxy. "Commander," Kelvin said slowly, "you could have died today. All of your soldiers could have died. For people you never met. People who are not even your species." Danny nodded. "That is correct. Why? I have to understand. Why would you risk everything for strangers?" Danny was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft and tired. "Because if we would not die for them, then what would we die for? Glory? Territory? Resources?" He shook his head. "That is what the Keth believe in. We believe in something else." "What?" Danny looked at the civilians being led to safety. Children held their parents' hands. Elderly beings supported each other. Strangers helped strangers, united by the simple fact of their survival. "We believe that some things matter more than our own survival," Danny said. "We believe that the strong should protect the weak. We believe that every life has value, regardless of species or origin." He met Kelvin's eyes. "We believe in being human." Kelvin stared at him. In that moment, he understood why the cosmos would learn to fear these strange creatures from a distant world. Not because they were strong. Not because they were ruthless. Because they would never stop fighting for what they believed in. The Keth fleet retreated before dawn. Their remaining ships fled into the darkness of space, leaving Weimar 6 to the Alliance. For the first time in this war, the unstoppable Keth Dominion had been stopped. The news spread across the galaxy like wildfire through dry grass. Kelvin stood on the surface of the planet, watching the sunrise paint the rocky landscape in shades of orange and gold. Behind him, human soldiers helped civilians board evacuation transports. The work was slow and careful. Each person counted and checked before being allowed to leave. The human casualties were worse than anyone had expected. Of the 80 soldiers who had deployed to the surface, only 31 remained alive. 60% losses. Any other military force would have called it a disaster. The humans called it the cost of doing what was right. Admiral Sirath had arrived on the surface to personally thank the human commander. Kelvin watched the meeting from a distance, his recording device capturing every word. "Commander Cole," Sirath said, "on behalf of the Velnorian people and the entire Alliance, I thank you. What your people accomplished here is beyond anything we imagined possible." Danny stood with his arm in a sling, his face marked by fresh scars. He looked like a man who had walked through fire and come out the other side. "We did what any soldier should do, Admiral. We protected the innocent." Sirath hesitated before his next words. "I must confess, Commander, that I doubted your people. When you arrived with only 3 ships, I thought you were foolish. I thought you did not understand what you were facing." Danny smiled slightly. "We understood perfectly, Admiral. We just did not care about the odds." The Admiral bowed his head in respect, a gesture that Velmorians reserved for only the most honored warriors. "If all humans are like you, Commander, then the galaxy is fortunate that your people choose to protect rather than conquer." As Sirith departed, Kelvin approached the human commander. His mind was full of questions, and he knew that his time was running short. The humans would be leaving soon, returning to their distant corner of the galaxy. "Commander Cole," Kelvin said, "may I interview some of your soldiers? For my historical record?" Danny nodded. "They have earned the right to tell their own stories. Just do not make them sound like heroes. They would not like that." Kelvin found Kate Morrison supervising the final evacuation. The tactical officer had dark circles under her eyes and bandages on both arms, but her voice remained steady and calm. "Lieutenant Morrison," Kelvin began, "you fought in the space battle and the ground assault. You saw comrades die. May I ask what drove you to keep fighting despite such losses?" Kate considered the question carefully. "Fear's a strange thing, historian. Everyone thinks that courage means not being afraid. That is not true. Courage means being terrified and doing what needs to be done anyway." She looked at the civilians boarding the transports. A small child waved at her, and she waved back. "Those people were counting on us," Kate continued. "They did not know our names. They had never seen our faces. But they believed that someone would come to save them. We could not let them down." Marcus Grant was harder to find. The sergeant was helping carry wounded soldiers to the medical shuttles, refusing to rest until every one of his people was cared for. When Kelvin finally caught up with him, Grant was sitting alone by a broken piece of mining equipment, staring at the sky. "Sergeant Grant, may I ask you some questions?" Grant nodded without looking at him. "Ask what you want, historian. You have fought in many battles. You have seen terrible things. How do you continue? How do you face the fear?" Grant was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with exhaustion. "Fear is useful. It keeps you sharp, keeps you aware of danger. The trick is not to eliminate fear. The trick is to move anyway." He finally turned to look at Kelvin. "Every soldier feels fear before a battle. The ones who survive are the ones who do not let it paralyze them. And when you lose people? When friends die?" Grant's expression hardened. "Then you grieve. Later, in private, when the mission is over, you give them the respect they deserve by finishing what they started." Kyle Bennett was the last interview. The young soldier sat apart from the others, staring at his hands. The guilt of his hesitation in the tunnels still weighed on him. Kelvin approached carefully. "Private Bennett, may we speak?" Kyle looked up with red-rimmed eyes. "I almost got someone killed, historian. I froze when I should have acted." Kelvin sat down beside him. "You hesitated because the enemy was a child. Is that something to be ashamed of? In war, hesitation kills. That is what they taught us. And yet your commander said you did the right thing." Kyle was quiet. Then, slowly, a small smile crossed his face. "Lisa told me that mercy is not weakness. I did not believe her at first. But then I saw Commander Cole spare Vorath. He could have killed him. No one would have blamed him. Instead, he walked away. Why do you think he did that?" Kyle thought about it. "Because killing Vorath would not have brought anyone back. It would not have saved any more lives. It would just have been revenge." He looked at Kelvin with new understanding in his eyes. "We are not here to destroy. We are here to protect. And sometimes protecting means showing mercy, even to those who do not deserve it." The final interview was with Commander Danny Cole himself. The human leader stood at the edge of a cliff, watching his soldiers prepare to depart. His face was tired and lined with pain, but his eyes still held that same quiet intensity. "Commander," Kelvin said, "I have spoken with your people. I have recorded your battles. But I still do not fully understand. What makes humans fight so hard for strangers?" Danny did not answer immediately. He watched the sunrise for a long moment, letting the warmth touch his scarred face. "Do you know what I think about before every battle, historian?" Kelvin shook his head. "I think about a day when there will be no more battles. A day when children can grow up without fear, when families can live in peace, when no one has to die for someone else's greed or hatred." Danny turned to face him. "That day is not today. It may not come in my lifetime, but every time we protect an innocent life, we get a little closer." Kelvin felt something shift inside him. He had recorded hundreds of wars, thousands of battles. He had seen species fight for territory, for resources, for revenge. But he had never seen a species fight for an idea, for a future they might never see. "The galaxy will fear your people, Commander," Kelvin said softly. "You must know that." Danny nodded. "Good. Let them fear us. Let them know that if they threaten the innocent, if they prey on the weak, humans will come for them. Not for glory, not for conquest, just to set things right." He extended his hand, a human gesture of farewell that Kelvin had learned to recognize. Kelvin took it carefully, feeling the strength in those calloused fingers. "Tell our story, historian," Danny said. "Tell them what we did here, and tell them why." The human ships departed an hour later. Kelvin watched them climb into the sky, 3 small vessels against the vast darkness of space. They had come with so little and given so much. He returned to the Starlight Covenant and began writing his report. The words flowed easily, as if the story was telling itself through him. He wrote about the charge into the Keth Armada. He wrote about the silent battles in dark tunnels. He wrote about mercy shown to enemies and sacrifices made for strangers. He wrote about humans who faced impossible odds and refused to surrender. But the final paragraph was the hardest to write. He struggled with it for hours, searching for the right words to capture what he had witnessed. In the end, he kept it simple. The cosmos should fear humanity, not because they are cruel or bloodthirsty or unstoppable. The cosmos should fear them because they believe in something greater than themselves. They fight not for what they can gain, but for what they can protect. They charge into darkness, not because they do not feel fear, but because their love is stronger than their fear. He paused, his fingers hovering over the final line. They are not monsters. That is precisely what makes them terrifying. Kelvin saved his report and sent it to the High Council. Then he sat in his quarters, alone with his thoughts, watching the stars drift past his window. Somewhere out there, the humans were returning home, wounded, diminished, but unbroken. And somewhere out there, enemies were learning to fear the small creatures from that distant blue world. The galaxy had changed. Kelvin had watched it happen, and he knew, with absolute certainty, that this was only the beginning. The surface of Vaymar 6 was a wasteland of rock and dust. Mining equipment lay abandoned across the landscape, rusting monuments to the industry that had once thrived here. Kelvin crouched behind a broken vehicle, his recording device hovering at his shoulder. The sound of distant explosions echoed through the thin atmosphere. Sergeant Marcus Grant knelt beside him, scanning the horizon with sharp eyes. 15 human soldiers spread out around them, moving with silent precision through the debris field. They communicated through hand signals that Kelvin could not understand, a secret language of fingers and gestures. "The Keth have taken the main civilian shelter," Grant said quietly. 3,000 people inside, mostly families who could not evacuate in time. Kelvin felt sick. What will the Keth do with them? Grant's jaw tightened. Nothing good. That is why we are going in. A young soldier approached them. His face was pale beneath his helmet, and his hands gripped his weapon with white-knuckled tension. Kelvin's translator identified him as Private Kyle Bennett, and his service record indicated this was his first real combat deployment. "Sergeant," Kyle said, "Alliance Command is suggesting orbital bombardment. They say it would end the Keth presence quickly." Grant turned to look at the young man. "And the civilians?" Kyle looked away. "Acceptable losses," they said. Something changed in Grant's expression. It was not anger, not exactly. It was something deeper and more dangerous. He stood up and keyed his communication device. "Commander Cole, this is Grant. Alliance Command wants to bomb the shelter from orbit. What are your orders?" Danny Cole's response was immediate. "Negative on orbital strike. We do not kill innocents to destroy enemies. Find another way." Grant nodded as if he had expected that answer. "Understood, Commander. We will get it done." He turned to Kyle. "Tell Alliance Command that humans do not murder children to save time." "We are going in." The team moved through the mining colony like ghosts. Kelvin struggled to keep up with them, his long limbs poorly suited for the constant crouching and climbing. But he refused to fall behind. He needed to see this. They entered the tunnel system that ran beneath the colony. The passages were dark and narrow, filled with the echoes of dripping water and distant machinery. Kelvin's eyes adjusted slowly to the gloom. The humans did not seem bothered by the darkness at all. "How can you see?" Kelvin whispered to Grant. The sergeant tapped his helmet. "Low light enhancement. But honestly, we could do this blind. Humans are good at fighting in the dark. We have been doing it for a very long time." A hand signal from the point soldier stopped the group. Grant crept forward to investigate and returned with grim news. Keth patrol ahead. 6 soldiers guarding the main junction. Kelvin expected the humans to plan an elaborate assault. He expected discussion and debate about the best approach. Instead, Grant simply nodded to his team. "Quiet takedown." On my mark. The humans moved so fast that Kelvin almost missed it. One moment, the Keth patrol was standing guard. The next moment, they were on the ground, silent and still. The human soldiers had eliminated them with knives and bare hands. Without making a sound, Kelvin stared at the fallen Keth. They were large creatures, armored and armed. Any one of them should have been a match for 2 or 3 soldiers of other species. The humans had killed all 6 in less than 10 seconds. "Keep moving," Grant said. "We are on the clock." They continued deeper into the tunnels. Twice more they encountered Keth patrols, and twice more the humans dealt with them in silence. Kelvin began to understand something that the galaxy had missed about humanity. They were not just warriors. They were predators. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber. Light filtered in from above, revealing a scene that made Kelvin's blood freeze. A young Keth stood in the center of the chamber. It was smaller than the adult soldiers, its exoskeleton still soft and developing. A child, Kelvin realized. A Keth child with a weapon in its hands. Private Kyle Bennett had his rifle aimed at the young Keth. His finger rested on the trigger. The shot would be easy, justified by any military standard. The enemy was the enemy, regardless of age. Kyle hesitated. The Keth child fired. The shot struck another human soldier in the shoulder, spinning him around with a cry of pain. Chaos erupted as more Keth soldiers emerged from hiding. "Ambush!" Grant shouted. "Return fire!" The chamber became a storm of energy beams and bullets. Kelvin pressed himself against the wall, making himself as small as possible. He watched the humans fight with desperate ferocity, pushing back the Keth assault through sheer aggression. When it was over, 8 Keth soldiers lay dead. The human soldier who had been shot sat against the wall, clutching his wounded shoulder. A woman in a medic's uniform knelt beside him, working quickly to stop the bleeding. Her name tag read Vance. The Keth child was gone. Having fled during the battle, Kyle Bennett stood frozen in place, his face twisted with guilt. I am sorry. I am so sorry. I should have taken the shot. Lisa Vance looked up from her patient. You hesitated because it was a child. That makes you human, Kyle. Not weak. Human. Grant approached the young soldier. For a moment, Kelvin expected anger. Instead, the sergeant put a hand on Kyle's shoulder. We do not become monsters to fight monsters, Grant said. Remember that. Now get your head back in the game. We have work to do. They reached the civilian shelter an hour later. The entrance was heavily guarded by Keth forces. Kelvin counted at least 30 enemy soldiers, plus heavy weapons emplacements. The humans had fewer than 15 fighters remaining. Commander Danny Cole's shuttle had landed nearby. The commander himself joined them at the observation point, surveying the enemy defenses with cold calculation. Options? He asked. Grant shook his head. Frontal assault is suicide. But there is no back door. They have sealed all the other entrances. Danny was quiet for a long moment. He looked at each of his soldiers in turn, meeting their eyes. Kelvin saw something pass between them, an unspoken communication that transcended words. Then we go through the front, Danny said. Fast and hard. We break their line and get inside before they can react. Kate Morrison, who had survived the space battle and joined the ground team, stepped forward. Commander, the odds are not in our favor. Danny smiled that dangerous smile. They never are, Morrison. That is why they should be scared. He turned to address his soldiers. His voice was quiet but carried to every ear. Listen to me. Behind those doors are 3,000 people who have never met us. They do not know our names. They do not know where we come from. They just know that they are afraid, and they are praying for someone to save them. He paused. We are that someone. Today, we are the answer to their prayers. So we go in together, and we bring them out alive. Every single one. The humans checked their weapons. They tightened their armor. They looked at each other with eyes that held no fear, only determination. On my signal, Danny said. For Earth, for the innocent. For each other. He raised his hand. The humans tensed like coiled springs. Now, they charged.